Hello, welcome back to Learn Oikonomia. In this video, we are going to look at a very serious topic, that is recession. Are we facing a recession right now, or is the world ready to face a recession in 2023? We are going to see all these kinds of things in this video. So let's get started. We can see that as central banks across the world simultaneously hike interest rates in response to inflation in the economy, the world might be edging toward a global recession. And since all the world economies, all the countries, respective of their development status in the world, we can see that developing economies, developed economies, underdeveloped economies, all these economies are facing a kind of what to say standstill kind of situation. As a result, they are fearing that they would see a recession or they would experience a recession in 2023. All the world economies are actually hiking their interest rates. All the central banks of world economies are increasing their interest rate in response to inflation. We can see that a string of financial crises in the emerging market as well as developing economies that would do them lasting harm, as per comprehensive new study which was done by the World Bank. So we can see how different kinds of economies are actually preparing for inflation or preparing for recession. Now they are experiencing inflation, and when this inflation becomes prolonged, that can lead to a kind of recession. How this happens is because when there is inflation in the economy, the central bank would be hiking their interest rates in the economy, and when the interest rates increases, the investment would become costly, and as a result of costly investment, people would be reluctant to make investment in different productive activities. As a result of that, there will be reduction in production, which will lead to reduction in employment, which will lead to reduction in consumption expenditure, and altogether this is something which leads to what is known as recession in the economies. Central banks of various economies or various developed or developing countries, they have been increasing the interest rate this year with a degree of synchronicity, and this is not seen over the past 5 decades. And now what we could see is a kind of trend that is likely to continue well into next year. So this is what is told by the World Bank in its report. Currently, expected trajectory of interest rate increases and other policy action might not be sufficient to deal with the global inflation, to bring the global inflation level back to the level which was happening or which was there before the pandemic era. Investors expect central banks to increase their global monetary policy rates to almost 4% through 2023, and this is considered to be an increase of more than 2 percentage point over their 2021 average. We can see that unless and until there is supply disruptions and labor market pressures which would subside, the interest rate increase could leave the global core inflation rate at about 5%, and this is what is expected in 2023. This is considered to be nearly double the 5-year average before the pandemic, and this is what is found by the study. And when I say the global core inflation rate here, it actually excludes the case of energy. And by excluding the energy category, it is calculated as at about 5% in 2023. This is what is expected to happen in 2023. Now, so to deal with the cutting of global inflation to a rate which is consistent with the targets of different central banks of different economies, we can see that this may lead to an increase in the interest rate, and this is up to an addition of 12 percent points, and this too is told by the report of World Bank. The World Bank again say that if this were accompanied by financial stress, global GDP growth would definitely slow down, and this slowdown is something which would be to an extent of 0.5% in 2023. That means that there would be a 0.4% contraction in the per capita terms, which would meet the technical definition of global recession. We know the recession involves a kind of sustained uh, reduction in the GDP of a country for at least for three consecutive quarters. When this happened, we can see that there is a kind of recession happening in economy. So here the global growth is something which would slow down very sharply with further with signs and signals of further slowing down, and this is what is considered to be a recession. So here different people are expressing their concerns about the world falling into a trap of recession. The World Bank Group President David Malpass has told that his deep concern is that these kinds of trends would persist, and when these persist, this would persist with a long-lasting consequence, and these consequences are very much devastating for the people, especially in the emerging market economies and developing economies. And he says that in order to attain low inflation rates, currency stability as well as faster economic growth are very much needed, and policymakers should be able to shift their focus from reducing consumption to boosting production. Policies are very much important when it comes to recessionary phase. We know how the government is very much important, and the role of government has been stressed not only by Keynes but also the modern economists like Paul Krugman. He has stressed the importance of government, and this was what we could see not only in the Great Depression, which has happened in the 1930s, but also we have seen how effective the role of government is when it came to the 2008 financial crisis. And are we repeating the same thing again? So this is what is something we have to answer to ourselves. We need policies from the arena of both the central banks of the world and also the financial and also the fiscal policies from the part of government are required to deal with a recessionary phase in the economy. So policy should seek to generate additional investment, and this is something which would stimulate productivity and capital allocation, which is very much essential to promote growth as well as poverty reduction. The study conducted by World Bank has highlighted the fraud circumstances under which the central banks would be fighting inflation today. If you look into the case of certain historical indicators of global recessions, we could see that these are giving some flashing warnings. The global economy is now in its steepest slowdown following a post-recession recovery since 1970. We can see that consumer confidence in the global level has suffered a lot, and that occurred a sharper decline than in the run up to previous global recessions. The world's largest economies, if you take the case of the world's three largest economies like US, China, and Euro area or the European Union, these we could see that these economies have been slowing very sharply. Under these kinds of circumstances, even a moderate hit to the global economy over the next year could definitely tip to what is known as recession. And the study by World Bank has relied on insights from previous global recessionary situations in order to analyze the recent evolution of economic activity, as well as they have presented several scenarios for 2020 to 24 recession. A slowdown, this is something which can call for a counter-cyclical policy to support activity. Also, we could see that the threat of recession and limited fiscal space are something which spur policymakers in many economies to withdraw the policy support as the global economy slows down very sharply. If you look if you look into the case of 1970s, we had an experience with respect to recessionary phase, the policy response to 1975 global recession, subsequent period of stagflation, recession in 82. All these have some kind of illustration with respect to the risk of allowing inflation to remain elevated for long while growth is very weak. Now, the case of 1982 global recession, this is something which has coincided with the second lowest growth rate in developing economies over the past 5 decades, and the second will lead to 2020. It has triggered more than 440 debt crises, and this was something which was followed by a decade of lowest growth, and especially this is something which could be seen in the developing economies. We could see that a tightening of monetary policy yeah, by different central banks, and the fiscal policies are tightening. This is something which has some effect to prove helpful in reducing inflation, and this is what is told by Ian Coach, the World Bank's acting vice president for equitable growth finance and institutions. But we have to see that since they are highly synchronous across countries, they can be mutually compounding effects with respect to tightening financial condition as well as steepening of the global economic slowdown, especially when it comes to the case of emerging market economies. Policy makers in these economies as well as policy makers in developing economies, they have to be very much ready in order to manage the potential spillovers from globally synchronous tightening of policies. So, the central banks of different countries should be able to make their effort to control inflation, and this could be done without touching off a global recession. That is very much important. So, how can we do? How can we deal with all these kinds of things? Whenever there is inflation, whenever there is inflation which is above the target level, what we have to do is that we have to bring the inflation down at least to the target level. So that is why the central banks of the countries which face these kinds of situations are increasing interest rate. But when they increase interest rate, what ultimately lead to is a recessionary situation if the effects are prolonged. But this will require some concrete action by variety of policymakers to deal with a kind of situation that we are facing today. What I want to say is like a central banks might be able to communicate policy decisions clearly while safeguarding their independence. So this is very much important to anchor inflation expectations and reduce the degree of tightening. Especially when it comes to the advanced economies or developed economies, central banks in these economies should be able to keep in their mind that the cross-border spillover effects of monetary tightening has some effects that will reach almost all the sections of the world. As when it comes to the emerging market as well as developing economies, the central banks should be able to strengthen the macro prudential regulations as well as they should be able to build some foreign exchange reserves. These are very important. Now, coming to the role of fiscal authorities, these authorities will need to carefully calibrate the withdrawal of fiscal support measures, but it should make it sure that consistent it is something whatever it does is consistent with the monetary policy objectives. That means that the fraction of countries which use tight fiscal policies next year is expected to reach its highest level, and this highest level would be the highest of all since early 1990s. And this is something which is expected to amplify the effect of monetary policy on growth, and that is why policy makers should put in place some credible medium-term fiscal plans and provide some self-target or some targeted relief to vulnerable households. What are the other actions that the government as well as monetary policy authority can do? other economic policy makers will need to join in its fight against inflation, and this is very much important. And what are these which would lead to a kind of which would help our economy or the world economy to escape from these kinds of situations. So first of all, we can see that there can be some kind of easing in the labor market constraints. Policy measures can be of use here, and this is something which would help to increase the labor force participation. And as a result of labor force participation, there will be reduction in price pressures. And labor market policies are very important when it comes to facilitating the reallocation of displaced workers. Next, we can boost the global supply of commodities. So when the supply of commodities are more, we can actually deal with what is known as inflation in the economy. Global coordination is very important in order to increase food as well as energy supply. And when it comes to energy commodities, policymakers should come together to accelerate the transition to low carbon energy sources, and this is something which would reduce the energy consumption of the world. Also, we can go for a strengthening of global trade networks, and cooperation of policymakers in this regard is very important, and this is something which would elevate global supply bottlenecks as well. There should be some rule-based international economic order, and this is something which can safeguard against the threat of protectionism as well as fragmentation, which may disrupt the trade networks. So that's all about today. You might got some understanding with respect to how our world is approaching recession in 2023 and what can be done to deal with this recession in 2023, and or what can be done to reduce the intensity of recession which we might face in 2023. So that's all for today. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. I'm requesting all my non-subscriber viewers to subscribe to this channel for supporting me. You can also be a part of my Telegram channel and Telegram group to discuss your doubts. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching.